Opendoor's weekly acquisition contract tracking. And so 537 contracts went out the door.
I would love to see this really be attacked in a meaningful way, given the debt and the deficits that we're running and continuing to run. And
I was amazed at my interactions with Claude, maybe 14, 15 hours building an application.
AI is better for your business in the long run than in the short term. It very well could be that AI takes your business or disrupts you in ways that aren't positive for you.
Episode 78 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times. Jeff, it's good to be back with you today.
Happy to be here, Mark. I really like the intensity with which you made the introduction. It's funny, like you settle into these things and it just becomes kind of what you expect to hear. And I like that we've at least settled on something that's honest and self-diagnosing, I think, as far as describing us and the times that we live in.
Yeah, boy. This is a really fun evolution, I think, to watch here, Jeff. We are in the middle of studio updates or turning an office into a semi-studio. How we've gotten 78 podcasts and something like 205 videos output without having any effort in a studio, I don't know. But if anybody could pull that off, it would be you and I with our procrastination and laziness.
Yeah, no doubt. It'll be fun to do a little bit of reworking and see if what the effect or the impact is. But there's a lot of things, and it's definitely been kind of a theme I think that we've had of start somewhere and then iterate or just get better over time. We've gotten the start somewhere part down. We haven't gotten the get better yet over time, at least as it pertains to the studio and the backdrop and all that sort of thing. So we'll see. I had to get my wife's opinion. In fact, I even leaned on kind of a fun use of artificial intelligence. There have been a lot of these memes of appraisers and everybody in the world asking chat to create an image about what it knows about you. And so, that's been a craze that's kind of come and gone. Well, I took a picture of the office that I'm trying to make into a quasi studio and said, what would it look like with these various things? Then I uploaded some images of like products and stuff. And it was really cool. Like it really helped me visualize, okay, maybe I want to go this way versus that in terms of, like materials to purchase and that sort of thing. It's kind of a fun application or use case for what people were otherwise just having fun with, make a caricature of me based on what you know about me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, in the sense that I think probably the majority of people suffer from something that is at least well summarized by perfection is the enemy of profit kind of thing. Like if I can't be perfect to start, I'm not, or whatever my image of perfect is, I can't get started. And, we've talked about this before, but recording the first podcast 4, 5, 6 times that we did on Perea way back in the day, Jeff. And, I think we have intentionally been able to get over the hump of not giving in to the perfection as an enemy of profit, but we do seem to be a little too comfortable in the imperfection. So maybe we can effort to improve on that.
There is the right balance to strike there between not caring to get any better and not starting because you're so focused on trying to be production quality or top quality before you start with anything. So I think we're spurring ourselves to up the game a little bit, given that we know it's not perfect. At least we haven't been accused of that yet.
Yeah, and the good news, Jeff, is we made it this far. I mean, I think I would put a far greater than 50% chance that we were just talking to ourselves into some half-baked microphones and said, I'm not sure this is worth continuing to do. I have really enjoyed doing it. I think you have as well. It has helped me dig into some things some curiosities that I have in a way that I haven't been. I have not. I mean, I got 2 young kids and a senior in high school daughter at home. I don't find a lot of free time to read, and that's unfortunate. I do find some time to scroll. I'm embarrassed to admit, but I'll listen to some podcasts here and there and do that sort of thing. But this effort has really helped us, engage in interesting conversations with folks like Dr. Yoon that was on last week, and I think it's going to lead us into some other initiatives that we'll be able to talk about on future podcasts here.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. And to be honest with you, Mark, I was kind of pleasantly surprised just at how comfortable the conversation with Dr. Yoon was. Not because I'm a genius or you are, but we've just spent enough time trying to understand some of these underlying macro trends that as we're talking about the different topics that came up. There's natural curiosity, but it was stuff that I felt much more prepared to be discussing because of our efforts here than I ever would have if it was an initial episode we were trying to sit down and record and have an intelligible conversation with him, because I don't think we would have pulled that off. Some may argue that our conversations aren't intelligible anyway, but it certainly feels more comfortable, efforting to understand what's going on out there.
Yeah, you bet, Jeff. And I think the folks that listen to this podcast probably skew towards curious and actively seeking new opportunities or exploring new tools, whatever that is. I think that probably is, but this is having me continue to, or another avenue to exercise that muscle of diving into something that is uncomfortable and unfamiliar, being comfortable being in that discomfort. And I can't think of a more important skill right now with the artificial intelligence things that are coming through here. I mean, I haven't forwarded you the link, Jeff, but ARK Invest is, I don't think they've performed terribly well over the last 4 or 5 years, but I've just been always a fan of their bold thinking about the future and where business technologies are taking us, and in turn, where society is taking us. And we are, of course, on the cusp of major, major changes. Just in the last 2 months, I feel like data centers in space where there is free energy and not regulatory restriction has gone from some Star Trek thing to like this has got to be done by the end of 2027 kind of thing. And it's that type of scale that it seems like we are scale of change that's thrust upon us now. And so the most important skill set, I think, is this curiosity and willingness to get comfortable in uncomfortable things.
Yeah, that really resonates. And it really seems to strike at the heart of just learning in an environment of things that you're not well versed in. It's easy as a professional to get comfortable knowing certain things, being good at what you do, and then just kind of rinse and repeat, day after day. I was helping my daughter study for a test, she had coming up in astronomy, I think. And so she had me read her questions and stuff. And she's really worried about how well she's going to do because it's kind of new territory. It's things she hasn't studied before. And it was a really good reminder for me that, when you dive into something you haven't studied before or is emerging, like artificial intelligence, it can be uncomfortable. I mean, we're trying to do things that we haven't done before. It's kind of some covert, initiatives and efforts. And man, it's being uncomfortable is definitely uncomfortable. And so, being willing to, stay there and plow through it as opposed to just retreating back to what is really important. And it's not, not easy. It's certainly not, first nature for most people either.
I think the biggest hurdle for me, Jeff, as silly as this is the embarrassment of my childhood, high school, college friends seeing me do this sort of thing, giving them fodder to endlessly make fun of whatever I'm doing. And I feel like I've well jumped over that hurdle and we're past it now. I mean, sure, the making fun of has happened there, but and still is continuing. It won't stop. But my wife won't even forward the podcast because she thinks I look ridiculous on the thumbnails for the podcast on YouTube. So pretty funny, but I don't know. It's good stuff. And I was having lunch with my college roommate yesterday, who's a criminal defense attorney. And he's like, I don't know if I could talk about anything for 40 minutes. And while we're having lunch, he's like, yeah, I represented a guy in a double murder case that happened just 2 blocks from where we're eating lunch. And there was like 5 more. It's like, I think you could probably talk for 40 minutes and keep people engaged much more than you and I can in real estate economics.
I think I would probably listen to his version of true crimes, more than I would listen to our own podcast, Mark, if it came down to it. But it's one of those things where you just think, you develop a skill or an ability and a comfort to do something by first being willing to wade in. And it sounded like he'd never even considered the reality of sitting down and talking about his experiences. It's not that you can't, it's just that you haven't. And so it's uncomfortable until you at least make a foray into it.
Yeah. Good stuff, Jeff. Well, we've got a interesting and diverse set of topics today. We will be talking a little bit about Opendoor. This is sort of a passion subject of mine right now. I'm like against the grain and maybe cautiously optimistic about what they're trying to do there. Have not been optimistic at all in the past. A catch up on Doge in the effort of saving the country, I think, with our budget deficits. We haven't talked a lot about the AI landscape. We'll be touching on a little bit of that today. You and I have been talking a lot off camera about that, as well as our firm completed its first UAD 3.6 file. What on earth does that mean to the non-appraisers out there? That just means the old form that appraisers use to complete appraisal reports is changing. And only several handfuls of these have been completed so far, but we did make our way through the first one, I think. And so we'll have a little bit of reporting on that at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, like you said, a diverse kind of lineup of topics, but looking forward to diving into these, Mark, because a few of these have been emerging, a few of some of these things we have touched on in the past, and then haven't come back to in a little bit. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, let's jump into to Opendoor. We started talking about this. A timeline probably doesn't matter as much as dollar per share, Jeff. So we started talking about this at about $10 a share. And it was because it sort of got new life. It was sitting at like 50 cents a share. And Keith Raboy and Eric Jackson are two like venture capital turnaround type guys that dug their heels into Opendoor, found an engaging CEO, Kaz, from Shopify. He's sort of an all-star in the tech operational space. And so they got life, and all of that, it went from 50 cents to $11. How about that return? And who could have seen that coming? Basically no one except those venture capital guys that sort of made it happen, I guess. But the story there was, hey, I think this business model has legs. This market is ripe for it. There are all sorts of inconveniences built into buying and selling a home, paying the 3%, 6% commissions to real estate agents, in showing your house. I mean, it's just all sorts of stuff. The trouble of difficulty in trying to buy your next house before you sell the current one. How do you navigate that cash problem and all that sort of stuff? But it has, from my estimation, been horribly mismanaged. The whole process, not just Opendoor, but Redfin and Zillow and all of those in the past 15 years. But I do think the opportunity still exists for someone wise to get into it. I don't think it's easy. I think just as in appraisal, those of us that are hoping to disrupt the market kind of get knocked down by the industry, by stakeholders, by the system that's set up, right? It's just not ripe for disruption on a lot of levels. It's a safe industry, right? We don't want to make a mistake that we're paying for like we did in the great financial crisis. So what I had said at the time of $10 or $11 a share was, I'm kind of intrigued here, but I certainly don't think, I think the business model and the company's got a lot of problems. And I don't think this is a straight up sort of story. I might be interested in nibbling at this. By the way, not financial advice on any level. I'm hoping this is sort of fun, and especially our listeners who are engaged in real estate, can kind of relate to the effort here of a publicly traded company. I think that's kind of fun to do and something we can't often do. But the stock, I started playing around with it, maybe picking up a share or two in the 550 range, and here it is sitting today at like 470. So it's dropped more than 50% off there, and it's like a $4 or $5 billion market cap, Jeff. And could a successful venture like this be a $50-60 million, $1 billion market cap? I think certainly so. If they figure out how to sell properties quickly, buy properly, don't hold on to properties long, and really become a convenience arm of the real estate market and kind of get a lot of properties into their environment. And I think they're making some progress there, Jeff. I've said a lot. Don't know if I'll pause for a moment in case to this point you've got anything to add.
Well, I think about it in two ways as far as the opportunity itself. One, is there a market opportunity? I think it's like clear cut. Yes. Like improving the selling process for sellers, the buying process for buyers. There's a lot of room to capitalize on that. The next question, as it pertains to Opendoor in particular, is, are they the ones that are going to be able to do it, to crack the code? Can they execute? Are they going to do it in a way that's effective? And that's what remains to be seen. A huge swing in stock price, from cents to $10, now down to 5. I was wondering if, when we started talking about it at 10, if it was us that caused the run on their stock price, drop that down. If we keep talking about it, it might give a better buying opportunity for you, Mark. I don't even aspire to have that much, sway on the markets, to be honest. But it really is a fascinating concept because it's so adjacent, to the space that we're in. I've got a brother I've referenced frequently who, represents buyers and sellers, as an agent. And I don't think I see this, even assuming a successful execution of what Opendoor is trying to do. I don't think it gets to a place where every home that's bought and sold in the U.S. goes through either Opendoor or a similar iBuyer, market or opportunity. But I could see them picking up a pretty significant share. So I think the opportunity's there, whether they can find a way to revamp the business model to be successful. If they can, I mean, there's a whole lot of transaction value and volume that can convert into, market cap value for the company, if they do. So it's been fun to watch kind of your fascination with it, but then, think a little bit more deeply about what it's going to take for them to be successful, in this effort and venture they're doing.
We've talked about this, Jeff, before, but I'm sure many haven't followed that closely to us talking about it. But I don't think Opendoor's brand has meant quality inventory. If I see an Opendoor sign on the front, I don't think, oh, that's probably a really nice house that'll turn over really quickly. In fact, my take is generally, and maybe this is just, I see the house with the Opendoor sign for 3 months and it sticks, so I see it a lot, and the one that sells quickly doesn't stick. But for the most part, we've praised a lot of these things, and it's just not the nicest home in the subdivision, right? That's typically what it is. And I think they are being intentional to try and adjust that imaging. And I think that's important, right? Because they just want to be an easy out for a seller, and they want to have homes that the next buyer are really going to want quickly, and that they can price, predict the pricing in transaction well. They've got some nice, I'll give you cash now, and once we sell it, if we sell it above what we think, then or some amount, then you'll get the extra that's there. And just trying to be in the way of the transaction and who the transaction happens through. So I think they're getting rid of a lot of inventory that was bought on the old algorithm or old philosophy. That's going to take some time because that's a lot of junk, I think, that's been out there to some degree, and are buying new inventory under the new brand or new attempt to brand. And so we need to watch that really quickly. And Jeff, if you pull up our sheet, I've got a lot of information on here. You can pause this if you happen to be watching on YouTube or where video is part of the podcast. But essentially, a note here on the right side of this is Opendoor's weekly acquisition contract tracking. And so 537 contracts went out the door. They're operating in a whole number of markets that they were not. I think that's really good. They have their earnings call today, which I'll be listening to and reporting back on. But it's not going to be pretty. They're losing money. They have been losing money. About 11 cents a share is the expectation. Revenue estimate of $594 million. But there's some cool stuff. When you dive into a company that you're interested in, you get on Twitter or whatever your choice is and start finding people. This Singularity Research has kind of just got a free tracker of how many active listings Opendoor's got, what their revenue of the month and the quarter. They'll list by address every property that they sold yesterday, and so you can kind of follow along with the progress here. And I'll be watching, how many properties they have listed on the market, how quickly they're selling, and all that sort of stuff, Jeff. So enough about it, I guess. I am watching closely. I don't expect some turnaround on the earnings call today. The new CEO came in September, and so they're moving quick, but I think they got a ways to go. And so stock's down at 470 or whatever it is today. I think it's interesting to watch, and is what we hope are knowledgeable real estate people, like we have done with Fannie and Freddie, who I have predicted are going to stall a little bit this year, possibly in going private. But we were certainly there on the upswing too. So hopefully we can use our experience to kind of watch these things and just see how we do.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that's been really interesting with Opendoor, I think you referenced, Mark, some independent reporting of some of their metrics and stats, but they're also posting some of that stuff directly on their website. And it's an interesting, just kind of accountability instrument that I think their CEO Kaz has implemented. Just cool. I think that in a public facing setting, they're showing here's how many we've bought and sold. That aspect of like, hey, we've got to drive action, we've got to drive efficiencies, and we're going to like report to the world how we're doing. Is It's a really interesting like management and kind of accountability aspect to it as well. So it's been fun to see what they're doing, not just in iBuyer space, but also how they're going about it from even a business and kind of tactics perspective as well.
Well, I'm going to get a quote on my house, Jeff, and we'll review maybe not the offer specifically, but just the process and my interpretation of it. Maybe you can do the same.
Yeah, that'd actually be a lot of fun. I've known of a couple of people that have had them in the past, but it's definitely been under the old model. Like it's been a while since I've talked to anybody who's gone through that process. So yeah, it'd be a lot of fun to have some firsthand experience, and maybe we can buy a house together and actually have a single recording studio between the two of us, Mark.
Jeff, just don't tell your wife that you have a buyer ready to go for your house. I wish you luck if that information leaks out.
Well, since she listened to the podcast, I'm probably in trouble. I'll have to do this before it airs. But yeah, we moved into our house thinking we were going to be there for 3 or 4 years, and our daughter, who's 17 now, was born just right after we moved in. So 17 years later, we're still in the house that we were only going to be in for 3 or 4 years. So I don't know if my wife would receive it with an expectation we're actually doing something different, or be mad at me for even looking into it.
You're Jeff, you were on the Warren Buffett track, and right where you should be. I think he's lived in his house for 60, 70 years, and just you're a wise guy.
I've got one part of that equation right. The part I don't have right is wildly successful investor, compounding over that same period of time, Mark. So I guess time to shift focus and work on that.
Yeah, very good. Well, what you got for us on Doge? What that has sure been quiet. You and I were quite excited about the initial initiative in early 2025.
Yeah, you bet. So, and as we were looking at this, had a fun conversation, with Dr. Yoon last week, and thinking about what are some topics that maybe we haven't touched on in a little bit. And Doge was one that just kind of came to mind. I listened to a recent interview, one that you've already listened to for sure, with Elon, and it wasn't about Doge specifically, but just the question around his efforts within the government to try to identify and then correct, waste and fraud and abuse within, federal government spending. It was interesting, certainly insightful to hear what his experience was in trying to do that. And so it prompted me to just do a little bit of searching what is out there that's being published. And there is a Doge.government website. It's fallen way short of what the significant projections were. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mark, but I think that Elon was saying they're going to find a $1 trillion of waste or cut or savings. And so to this point, whatever we are now, a year and a half almost into the administration, it's, that what they're purporting now is $215 billion in estimated savings. And I'm not exactly sure how they're calculating that. One of the things that was interesting, though, is they've then boiled that down to what does that mean on a per taxpayer basis? And that's about $1,335 per taxpayer. Again, well short of what was being billed as like the target and the audacious, goals and ambitions. But that there's any focus at all in this, I think, at least is encouraging, from my perspective. We've heard a lot of reporting of, fraud in Minneapolis, and then, speculation about how bad and rampant it might be in California and other places. I would love to see this really be attacked in a meaningful way, given the debt and the deficits that we're running and continuing to run. And so anyway, I mean, there are a lot of things going on, and it's hard to say, hey, we're running a deficit, we need to tax, tax people more, if there's also this known fraud and abuse and waste that's going on an underlying basis. And so it was kind of fun to look back and see what's being reported today versus what some of the ambitious projections were, Mark.
Yeah, you bet. In Elon talking about Doge, I think quite disappointed he is about the efforts, but did describe it as maybe a state of mind that has been instilled in some of the government departments and administrations. And I don't know. I hope that we're sticking there. I mean, 215 billion is nothing to sneeze at. So it's progress, but much has been done. And man, if you just get to Social Security and Medicaid and the fraud and waste that is there, I think you get darn near $1 trillion, right? I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot there, and I do think there's some effort. My moment of gained trust in the government is not really present in me right now. We won't talk about any of those things, but wow, and it's disappointing because I'm excited about a number of the initiatives from a business perspective, from an economy perspective that this administration is moving down, and I just want to see those things play out. Especially given the sacrifice of tariffs, what they've done to interest rates and home buyers generally that we've all had to suffer through. So I want to see this through. Like, okay, we've done the sacrificing. Now let's see the market come alive, and I hope we get there. I don't know if we'll get there.
Yeah, I know it. I mean, I'm obviously in the very same boat, and to the extent that it leads to less, cash outlays that are going to, an increasing tax bill and increased, just certainty around what to expect around, tax policy and interest rate and economic policy. All of those things lead to better growth and I think, more optimistic outlook for what's to come, as opposed to the alternative. So I'm with you in hoping that we see it play out, in a way that gives us something that we can, take as actionable.
Well, Jeff, I think we haven't talked about artificial intelligence, at least in detail on, probably in over a month on this podcast. It has been a common subject here. And, today I look at our podcast to date discussing artificial intelligence as, like if we look at it in 15 years, look back at the year of 2025 and you and I sort of naively talking about all this and kind of going back and forth on, will this be impactful? I don't really know. Is it that far of a jump from, a formula in Excel and an if then statement? And, I don't know if embarrassing isn't the right word. I'm not going to be embarrassed at how ridiculous, whatever our opinions are at the time with the information that we had, but wrong, minimizing. I think those are things that probably will look back. I'm not 100% convinced, but I'm certain. I mean, I think over the last this year, I think that new software releases, I have been playing with different things, including Claude, and had some epiphany moments that are really exciting on a number of fronts. And I think the power of the flywheel just beginning to spin now. You start to feel some of that and see what others may be talking about, even though it wasn't having a direct impact in our business one way or another, or daily lives for that matter. So let's talk a little about the AI landscape. What are you seeing? How do you feel about our 2025 conversations and perspective, even sitting here today?
Yeah, as you talked about that, Mark, the thought came to mind, it would be really interesting if you had some sort of record a podcast like what we have, from 25 years ago or 30 years ago as the internet was coming of age, right? And everybody's opinions about, good, bad, ugly, what's going to lead to. Like, I have general thoughts and recollections. I was in high school, in the late 90s, and so it would be really interesting to have a firsthand accounting of some of those conversations taking place at that time, because it ranged from, the internet's going to change everything to this is a fad that nobody's really going to pick up on. Who actually wants to buy shoes if you can't try them on, or like whatever the case was for not, buying things online and interacting online in the way that it is just second nature to us now. I think if we fast forward another 25 or 30 years, these conversations will be kind of cool that they are recorded in some sense, in spite of how, stupid, naive we're certainly going to sound. But to your point, like, we're making the best decisions and even projections for the future that we can based on the information that we've got. And man, is it rapidly changing and evolving. I mean, you referenced just changes this year. And it's like, yeah, I mean, in the AI landscape, it really has changed dramatically. And so, as I look at it and think about it, I'm the same with you. Like, I know it's going to sound silly in some ways. And on the other hand, it's like, look, it's what we have to work with. It's what we know. And I don't know what, tech and AI looks like in 20 years from now, but it'll probably be different than I'm envisioning it one way or another.
I wish I didn't see the AI conversation necessarily going this way, Jeff. I would have prepared it if I had, but I wish we had the video, but I at least looked up the quote of Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer in 2007, laughing when the journalist brings up the newly developed and launched iPhone, saying there is no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. I just hope that we don't make any sort of declarative absolute statements like this that proves so horribly wrong. So we'll see. Time will tell. I don't think we have done that to this point, but predicting where the impacts will be is really, really difficult, Jeff. And, any appraiser, realtor, loan officer worth their salt is wondering if AI is going to replace them. We've talked a lot about that here. And I think that's probably been the perch from which we're opining, right? A little bit nervous about if it is impactful, that it means we're no more. What do you think about that? What are your thoughts today on AI's impact on business professionals, real estate professionals, maybe specifically?
Boy, there are a lot of thoughts I think that come to mind. One of the things that it really forces anybody to do who's afraid that it might impact them, whether real estate or well beyond, it forces you to step back and look at what is it that I really do versus what are just some of the tasks that are required of me to do what I really do, and what can be easily replaced or automated away, and what maybe can't. And one of those things that come to mind, Mark, in conversations we've had, and even just in things as I've thought about it, is, so far still humans interact and transactions and like we work together. There's still an aspect of relationships in like real estate transactions and in other things that, don't get fully replaced or automated away. From a real estate agent's perspective, it's kind of that peace of mind. It's the guide that walks somebody through a complex transaction that has a whole bunch of landmines that can, go off at any time and blow up, the purchase or the sale of a home that you're working on. For the appraiser, as I've thought about it, I think it's a certain level of certainty in an asset that you can provide by analyzing what's going on out there and then providing kind of a synthesis of a bunch of data points. Anymore, everybody has access to information online, including users of the appraisal services, but consumers do too. I mean, you can look on Zillow today and see what's listed for sale, what's sold recently. But what is much harder to do even still is synthesize those data points into, telling you what does that actually mean about my property, just because the house down the street is listed for, $300 a square foot or whatever the number is, or the other one sold for X number of dollars a square foot. What does that really mean for this property, either that I own and I'm trying to sell, or this property I'm trying to buy and I don't want to overpay for, or maybe I want to try to get a good deal on. And so it's the interpretation of the data points that are well out there that I think are things that are uniquely able to be, to this point, analyzed by humans and then communicated to other humans in a way that, that they still perceive and I think actually receive a lot of value in. There are a lot of things, Mark. There are a lot of things that this is going to touch and evolve the way that we work, as we look up in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. But those are some initial thoughts that come to mind as far as, what impact I think I see it having on humans, on real estate professionals in particular, and what it is that maybe not be as impacted, at least not nearly as quickly.
Yeah, boy, yeah, for sure. I think it was you that predicted 2026 would be the year of the agent, and I think on a lot of levels, Jeff, the agent is what will bring a lot of utility of artificial intelligence to us in the business professional. I was amazed at my interactions with Claude, maybe 14, 15 hours building an application for my just for like personal use. And this was live database, full SaaS, multi-tenant. Like I could go sell this thing to people if there was a use for it beyond my household. And I spun this all up, and the story that I've seen told many times is like I do not code. I don't know the first thing about code. and this describes me well. I have built some applications, but I am mostly the project manager, subject matter expert, not the coder on any level. So that describes me well. Just a total noob at this sort of stuff, and walked me through it all, and helped me strategize on different ways to attack from a software perspective. And just so an epiphany for me, for sure. OpenClaw in the all the rage that this is. A friend of the pod, Roy Meyer, has been talking about one that he spun up. You and I have been watching a lot of others, including listening to Peter Steinberger. That's not his last name. Do you know his last name?
Not on the spot, unfortunately.
So the guy that built OpenClaw and then sold it to OpenAI. Yeah, there's just so much going on. So, and Jeff, to me, I think how this is going to impact us is immeasurable at this point on a lot of levels and unpredictable. And we talked on previous episodes about the short supply of electricians right now. We've heard like Microsoft say, my number one shortage in Arizona trying to spin up a data center is electricians. Chamath has talked about paying electricians more than his software engineers in a data center. These guys are getting life-changing money here. And we're not training enough electricians, right? So now there's this huge, who would have predicted that? Maybe a few did, but I certainly didn't. I was looking at a couple of examples that were cute, if nothing else. That Toto, the toilet maker, the Japanese toilet maker, Jeff, they have a process for making their scientific process for making their ceramic and maybe porcelain that goes into these toilets. And it just so happens that process is very critical in making these chips at these fabrication plants. And so they have had a spike in business in a totally different vertical from toilets to chip manufacturing. And the MSG maker, yes, the it's not a spice. I don't know what you would call it. Maybe it is a spice. I don't know, but it goes into food, right? This is what everybody says makes us sleepy, I think, in American Asian food. Hinamoto, I think it is. So they have a process in making their MSG that is also really important in chip fabrication. And so they have had this enormous growth. And in fact, the MSG maker was the major shortage for NVIDIA and TSMC in making these chips. There's all these impacts, and we're the last example of this is in the burgeoning robotaxi thing that we've talked about. Tesla is rolling this out. Waymo's doing quite well with it, and this isn't just going after a total addressable market that is the current taxi and Uber group. That when it becomes so much cheaper, you don't have the inconvenience of having to sit in the car with a stranger for an extended period of time. That the amount of people that would take these grows dramatically. And so the AI makes the utility or use of the product far more, right? And so I think a lot of these markets are going to expand. So, could one day developing an opinion of value, Jeff, become cheaper to do? Maybe still need, and hopefully, I think it probably will, still need the appraiser narrating, and following along and making sure that everything is, that there isn't bad data in there and data cancers or whatever. But now, if getting an opinion of value from an appraiser ends up being cheaper at some point, more people would like it, right? Well, if I can have an appraiser give me this at a cheaper cost, maybe I want to do that. So there's just a lot of unpredictable offshoots, Jeff, and I'm increasingly fascinated to see how it all is playing out.
I think that's really a critical perspective to just keep in mind for all of us trying to understand, what is the impact going to be. One, nobody knows for sure what the landscape's going to look like in years down the road, but it's very, in my mind, it's a certainty that there are going to be things that evolve and that come up that we just don't anticipate in the moment. And even the example of NVIDIA, as you were talking, Mark, is interesting. They were they make GPUs, graphical processing units, which basically went into like gaming, computers for a long time, until it turned out that the GPU processing of artificial intelligence, like compute style, is more efficient than the CPU that's been used. And so, this thing that was pretty, narrowly defined and niche product, turns out to be widely applicable in just the build out of artificial intelligence computing and infrastructure. And so there's just a lot of these positive, I would say, like offshoots or externalities that come out of this. And knowing what those are going to be for any individual professional is challenging and is relatively uncertain in my mind, other than it's worth just being open-minded to what might some of those possibilities be. And if it's more efficient, less costly, opinions of value, or, buyer and seller representative services or mortgage originations, if it leads you to be able to provide, significantly more of those kinds of services in new, unique, maybe novel ways in time, it may be that AI is better for your business in the long run than in the short term. It very well could be that AI takes your business or disrupts you in ways that aren't positive for you. I just don't know. And I would rather be at least of a mind of trying to find how can I responsibly leverage and incorporate it. And even if that requires being, open-minded and uncomfortable for a while of trying to figure out what some of those options might be, I just see that as a better near-term mentality and outlook on the realities than, just afraid that it's going to ruin everything, or, trying to fight against all of it, saying, if I don't continue to do things the way they've always been done, it's automatically going to be a problem, or I can't do it anyway. And so it requires some humility and some nimbleness to be willing to try to have this ultimately be a positive in the long run for any of the professionals that are out there. But it's uncomfortable. It's just uncomfortable not knowing, and yet I think that's a reality for a lot of us.
Yeah, I as a real estate professional, I think your path to continued success is, or the paths multiple are far greater if AI is a critical piece of how you operate going forward. I think that is certainly true. So, give yourself a fighting chance on a lot of levels. And there will be plenty that do find continued success without those tools. And those tools can be used to actually do, like an appraiser, developing an opinion of value. But I really, when I'm saying this, I'm thinking even more so in the processing of the appraisal one way or another. There's a lot of stuff we do outside of developing an opinion of value that I think, it becomes critical to involve these tools that just help you be better at things that are important to customers you serve.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the last thought on this topic for me is just, I was listening to kind of a series that the Appraisal Foundation has put out, like little mini podcasts, talking about the evolution of the professional standards that we have and what they mean. And one of the points that they were making is that it's reasonable for appraisers to employ assumptions that are generally kind of accepted or like general assumptions, because nobody can investigate every single aspect of every single property as deeply and granularly as like you possibly could for almost every, if not every, application. But one of the things that this technology can do is start to open doors of what have I never done before that I might actually want to do if it was much faster, much cheaper, much more like accessible to me. And so in the vein of what you're talking about, I think, Mark, I would love to be cross-checking all of the data that I have. I would love to have more approaches or like analytics around everything that I do, even though I'm already, conscientious about trying to, do the best work product, that you can. But they're just things that you don't or haven't ever even thought about doing because it's just inherently restrictive, for various reasons. And I think this opens some of those doors, but it requires this curiosity that you've talked about. It requires this willingness to test and try things, and it can lead to good places and to good things. Certainly there's negative possibilities as well, but it's fascinating to try to wrap your head around, and I'm certainly still in the middle of that. I don't feel like I have as firm of a grasp as I'd like, but I'm at least trying to be open-minded to what can make things better as opposed to just automatically worse.
You bet. You bet. Well, much more to come on this. It's possible you and I are securing a Mac Mini. People can take from that what they want, but more on that later here. So, Jeff, on to the alien acronym of UAD 3.6. That is Uniform Appraisal Dataset 3.6. What does that mean? First of all, why don't you remind the listeners and especially inform the listeners that are not appraisers?
I think the simplest way to think about it is if you've ever looked at an appraisal before, residential appraisal, and specifically one that was for a mortgage company, it's going to look a lot different. 3.6 looks a lot different. It's formatted differently. In a nutshell, technically what that means is there's a lot more standardization to how the appraiser inputs, like describes the property, the market, the comparable sales, and arrives at their opinion of value. The processes, the techniques, they're still using comparable sales. You're still, doing what you did at a basic level, but the way it gets reported has been a radical, it's drastically changing. And this is driven by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, wanting more readable, more consistent, more aligned data that works better in this, digital era that we live in, not something that was designed for a typewriter form to literally be filled out that they just digitized, but still was kind of filled out, like you were doing it on a typewriter, basically. So I don't know if I've nutshelled that enough, Mark. I better stop or else it'll be more than a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's great, Jeff. And so it is a new appraisal process and form that I guess process is probably the wrong word, but reporting format, and a new process in that certain fields that we always fill out or have to discuss or led to discuss, or it's just changing the way that we do that, and often in a more structured environment. I think in reality, stakeholders have watched the appraisal process and taken in millions of appraisals and taken what they've learned from that and tried to improve the process from their standpoint, in assessing risk and valuing properties for the sake of making loans. So appraisers generally have been pretty concerned. I think appraisers generally don't like change. I don't blame them. I've built a system and a process for how I get through an appraisal today. It will be different on some level, and not knowing exactly how different it will be and in what ways is uncomfortable, right? So here we are. We've chosen not to talk a lot about this on the show, partially because we do our best to keep the listeners awake, and I'm not sure we're even successful in doing that without talking about this. But figured at the end of this podcast, it would be good just to acknowledge 3.6. Acurity, our firm, has delivered its first 3.6 report, and in that, I think there's probably a little bit of, hey, here's how it went, sort of use case here that some might find useful.
Yeah, you bet. And I think to preface the conversation, or at least I think give proper context, this is something that all of the software providers, not just for appraisal report writers, but for those that appraisal management companies and lenders use to be able to receive appraisal reports and feed them into, their lending systems. This UAD 3.6 is not just an appraisal thing, but it's the way that data gets collected within the mortgage process generally. And so it's been a big endeavor. It's been years in the making, and all of the software providers that I know of have a roadmap or at least a timeline of, hey, we've got to at least be minimally viable today. Here are the things that we want to be adding. Here's where we want to be, in the future or down the road. And I think most of them have those things, published on their websites. We had a conversation, with the CEO of one of those software providers, one that delivered the first UAD 3.6 report. SFREP is the name of that company. And I think he was acknowledging that, hey, we're functional, like we've got it there, but we're certainly not a finished, polished product yet. There are a lot of things that we want to do. And as I talk with any of the providers, I think they all are at various versions of that, we're striving to be viable initially and then adding functionality as we go, and some things you just don't work until you actually try to make them work, and then they just don't. So that's kind of the backdrop, I think, against which I would describe the moment in time that we are right now in this space.
Yeah, I think the GSEs, government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie and Freddie, have put a lot on these software companies. This is a big endeavor, and I kind of feel like it's too much to be putting on the software companies in the way that was done just by watching how they've struggled to get their product live to market. But here we are, and Acurity didn't. We would have been happy to have been the first, but we're not. I don't know. We are willing and ready and have been, and the first one came over, went and got it done. We get numerous emails and calls asking about our preparedness. And I think, I honestly think folks may be asking the wrong question, that the right question, Jeff, is asking our willingness, because there's a lot of appraisers that just aren't willing to do this. And we certainly are like, let's dive into the discomfort. Let's get uncomfortable and be comfortable with that. And so the thing that I'll say, and this is true of the first one that was completed, the account of it in several I've heard since, I think it is not an enormous amount more work early on. I think a lot of the fields that are added are optional fields. And I don't think those were ever, I don't think that context was put around describing the sales that you chose not to use one by one, as an example, Jeff. That is an optional table, right? And it's just one example, but there are a lot out there that are like that. And sure, this has not been an easy thing to get through. A lot of new things to deal with one way or another. But I don't feel like it is a brand new process or 300% more work to do to get one out the door.
No, yeah, I think that's a fair description, Mark. And one other point of context that I think is helpful for people is that in residential appraising, there have been a handful of different forms for different property types, from a single family house to a condo to a manufactured house to a 2 to 4 family, duplex, type of property. Those are all individual and distinct forms, similar, but totally different forms. This UAD 3.6 combines all of that into a single reporting format for any property type. And so just by definition, it simply means that not all of the fields that could be used are going to be applicable. In fact, in almost every assignment, only a fraction of the available fields are even relevant or even apply. And so, with that perspective, I think it's important to know that we did the first one. There were some learnings that came out of this, like one, we used mobile technology, found that we didn't have the app updated, and that was causing problems reading this newest version and form in the field. So we did the best we could to get through that, but found that updating operating systems for an iPad, updating app would have made it go smoother. It will go smoother on the second round and beyond that. There's always a little bit of challenge with just working through the report itself, although that didn't come across as one of the significant pain points or problem areas. There were some challenges with prepping and delivering the report. In fact, I think you were as much in the weeds with that as anything, Mark. So any additional perspective on how actually getting it out the door went?
Yeah, one of the things that is helpful for like our size and being able to like, we know we're stepping into an unknown, so we're kind of partially just researching all the different software providers that are out there, but we're writing this report in multiple softwares just to see how they all handle this, because they all can choose to handle it very differently and do. And I think the biggest learning in my message to appraisers would be, hey, just because Fannie and Freddie have approved a software does not mean that there may not be hangups and hard stops in actually delivering the report to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We won't run into those problems, but our clients trying to do that, who are plugged directly into UCDP, which is the Fannie Mae database, ran into problems that were not surmountable with the timeline of this closing on this particular live file. And so we needed to jump to a different software vendor to get that done. And, so good for us for being able to jump to another one. I think the most important message to appraisers is, hey, there is an obstacle of you being able to figure out the software provided to you to get that done, but that may also not be the only obstacle that you run into in some other things that are a little bit beyond your control, Jeff.
Yeah, I think that's well stated, Mark. And, you don't know some of the issues that you're going to run into until you actually try to do it, both from the appraiser side as well as from the software side. And so, I'm observing much more frequent releases of software updates, fixing like identified bugs in the process as they go. And so, just because it didn't work this go around doesn't mean that it won't in the coming weeks and months as they tried to do. And the software providers are adding functionality that everybody needs and wants and don't yet have. So it's evolving. It's a work in progress for sure, but it required a little bit of hoop jumping to get this first one completely out the door.
I don't know how many have been delivered, Jeff. It probably wouldn't take but a few text messages to find out. I think we could. I know Ken DeFeo, as an example, was posting on social media when the first one was delivered from Fannie. And so I'd be interested to find that out. I think estimates are a couple dozen to 100, certainly less than 1,000. That's about all I've got right now. We're very early in the process. And a big thanks to Remington Jones, a friend of the pod, who we interviewed a little while ago at SFREP with Appraise It. They were very helpful in this initial process. So first one, I think behind us. It's never really gone right, but we'll field any other needs on that. But exciting. I mean, and my goodness, it took 8 weeks working with a client to try and find the first one, right? And the lender has an initiative, the appraisal management company has an initiative, we have an initiative. Let's do a first one, great. But there's loan origination software connections to Fannie and Freddie. There's portal. I mean, there's just all sorts of things that go into getting these things done that everybody has to get signed up. I think that's the complexity of the task at hand, Jeff. It is just getting all these systems plugged into the new system.
And we're just finally at a place to be able to do that. So I don't, begrudge somebody who's still working through bugs to make that happen. But, I've been telling our team, and it's crazy to think, but by the end of the year, I mean, unless something drastic changes between now and then, it's going to be the new normal. And so you're better off, if you plan on continuing to appraise in the future, diving in and learning it, even with some of the shortcomings, as opposed to putting off as long as you possibly can. And there are some who just are going to choose not to do it, which is fine. But we've cleared this first hurdle. And I look forward to now kind of understanding how to refine the process and make it better. There's going to be a learning curve, and it's going to be surmountable. Like it's not, it's not something that can't be done. So now the real fun work starts with figuring out how to refine the process from here.
Indeed, interesting times, Jeff. You and I continue to be uninteresting. Let's keep that trend going, and look forward to talking to you next time.
You got it, Mark. Until then.